So welcome back. This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy. And today's lesson is going to be kind of an interesting one. Today's lesson, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be introducing a tool that I call the Blah-blahmeter. That's right, the Blah-blahmeter, which is kind of a mouthful to say, and I like it for exactly that reason. We'll see what the tool is all about. So here's what it is. Everything that we're going to be talking about for the next 25-30 minutes boils down to a very, very simple concept. And the concept is this. We talk so much that often I don't think that we think very well. What I'd like to do is try to move us away from so much incessant talking and try to do a little bit better on the thinking side. Now, the reason why this is a bit of a challenge is because all of us for so long have been taught that the right way to think is by talking. And that's what the tool today is going to be about, because I want to focus on this part today, how we've been taught to talk, and see if we can't learn to do it a little bit better so that we can start to become more vivid. So what I'd like to really start is with a kind of a quick review. For those of you that were on the last session, you know that we were talking about the 3 steps that take us from too many words to much clearer communication. The first step, of course, is just acknowledging that we live in a world where there's a tremendous amount of noise and information. Step number 2 was coming up with what we called the bridge that's going to help us get out. And step number 3 was going to take us to a place where ideas were much more vivid. And what we're going to focus on today with the Blah-blahmeter is really this first point. We're going to talk about what it means to be in a world where there is so much noise, where it can be difficult to understand things, and we're going to find a way using the Blah-blahmeter to help begin to clarify some of what's going on. I think many of you probably remember this picture. We've seen it a few times now. This is the elemental breakdown of our brain into our 2 different essential modes of thought. One half of our brain, as we know, has evolved to be highly optimized for looking at the world in terms of little bits. And those little bits, of course, become letters. And those little letters become words. And then so on. And the other half of our mind has evolved, of course, to be the glue that pulls all of those things together so that we can understand entire thoughts. And if we have a word like dog, then over on the other side, of course, we might have something that looks like this, exactly as I've shown here. We can have a word, and then we can have the image of the same thing. The 2 represent the same thing, but of course are 2 completely different expressions of it. Now, as we go through all of our lessons, really, as all of you know, the emphasis is going to be on improving this part of our mind, because this is the part that we're weakest on and need to focus on how to get better. But for today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this side. We're going to focus on the word side, because this is the part that, again, most of us have spent most of our time learning how to be good at. So rather than saying, let's forget our words, no, we're not going to do that at all. We're going to remember our words, and as we begin to become more vivid, let's focus on these today. Why do these words matter? Why is it that the Blah-blahmeter becomes so important? Is because words are absolutely critical and absolutely important. What we're going to focus on for the next little bit of our time is quotes that have come from 5 quite important, notable, newsworthy individuals over the last couple of years. We're going to talk about some things that President Obama has said. We're going to talk about some things that a fellow named Bernie Madoff said. We're going to talk about some things that a guy named Captain Chesley Sullenberger said. We're going to talk about some things that General Petraeus said. We're going to talk about some things that the Coca-Cola company has said around one of its products. So I know that many of you are outside the United States, and this is kind of a U.S.-centric group of people. So real quickly, let's just review who these folks are, again, in the context of why does this matter. President Obama, everybody knows who President Obama is. Of course the things that he says matter, because he is a man of such incredible influence. Bernie Madoff just passed away not too long ago, was a manager of a financial institution, a very, very large financial company. Captain Sullenberger became very well known 2 years ago when the liner that he was flying that took off out of New York City hit some birds and both engines died, and what Captain Sullenberger had to do was land his plane without any power in the Hudson River, and he was able to do that gently enough to where every single person who was on the plane survived. So pretty fantastic story. General Petraeus, at the time that we're going to quote him, was the general in charge of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Tremendously important job. And then vitamin water is a product, as I mentioned, from the Coca-Cola company that over the last couple of years has become incredibly popular. And it's, as the name would indicate, it's a water product. It's a sweetened water product that contains some vitamins and minerals and things like that. So these are all fairly important people or important products that we're all familiar with. And here's what I'd like to do as we talk about them. I'm going to introduce to you 5 different quotations, 5 verbal quotations. And what I'd like you to do as I read through these, 2 things. Number 1, I'd like you to see if you can on your own identify which one of our 5 important figures might have said this. And then number 2, as we read through these quotes, I'd like you to try to identify how clearly it is that you individually understand what these quotes are about. So here's quote number 1. Now just listen to this and read along. This is especially formulated with nutrients that enable the body to exert physical power by contributing to structural integrity of the musculoskeletal system and by supporting optimal generation and utilization from food. Okay, who do you think might have said that? Or where do you think that would have been written? I guess it's probably pretty obvious. This is the label from Vitamin Water. The real second question I have for you is, as we read it one time, how much did you understand it? And I will say that I think that I personally sort of understood it. There was clearly some talk in there about generation and utilization of food and contributing to structural integrity. I sort of understood it. Do I walk away from this quote saying, yeah, hey, I totally get it? No, I don't. I sort of understood this. Now, every one of us, of course, is going to have our own reaction to these quotations, and that's absolutely what we would expect, because all of us are individuals with our own ability to understand things. And so, this is my take on it. So let's look at the next one. And this is a fairly long one, so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and read it, and I'll read along. I would say, actually, we defined it fairly clearly in terms of what we thought would work best. What I said is that it shouldn't be something that's simply a taxpayer subsidized system that wasn't accountable, but rather had to be self-sustaining through premiums, and that we had to compete with private insurers. Now, if you look at the results, the 80% of the various bills that are out there that people have agreed to reflect most of the ideas from this part of this process. But the 20% that still now is still the holdup would have been the holdup if we'd put forward a plan, hadn't put forward a plan, had left it to Congress, had written it ourselves, because it represents some long-standing ideological divisions in our Congress and, frankly, in our society. I don't know about you, but I'm sitting here and I'm saying, what? I know there's tremendous meaning in that paragraph, but I cannot make head or tail of it. So, number 1, who do we think might have said it? Of course, this was President Obama was saying it. He was talking about health care. And on my spectrum, I'm going to say that, you know what, I don't understand this. Go ahead and read it yourself. See if you can make some sense out of it. This is an absolutely critical message about health care reform. Our president is normally a very articulate person, but this statement makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do about it. So that was quote number 2. Quote number 3. Here's another one. Typically, a position will consist of the ownership of 30 to 35 S&P 100 stocks, most correlated to that index, the sale of the out-of-the-money calls on the index, and the purchase of the out-of-the-money puts on the index. The sale of the calls is designed to increase the rate of return, while allowing upward movement of the stock portfolio to the strike price of the calls. The puts, funded in large part by the sales of the calls, limit the portfolio's downside. I don't know about you, but once again, I'm saying, what? Something clearly of intelligence is buried in there somewhere, but I'm going to have to listen to that or read it multiple times and map it out to try to figure out what it's about. It's from Bernie Madoff. This is actually from the prospectus of Madoff Securities, explaining the really shockingly successful investment vehicles of Madoff Securities. So if you'd put money into Madoff Securities, this would have been what you'd read about, and that would have been great, except for the fact that many of you probably know that Bernie Madoff in the end was convicted of $21 billion in fraud, because it turns out that much of what he says here doesn't just sound like it makes no sense. It actually physically doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to say again, happily, that I don't understand this one at all. I say happily because I never invested my money in that fund. Follow along if you can. This one says, the oil spot is a term in counterinsurgency literature that connotes a peaceful, secure area. What you're trying to do is always extend that, to push that out. Down in Helmand province in Afghanistan, what we sought to do was build an oil spot that would encompass the 6 central districts of Helmand province, including Marja and others, and then just keep pushing that out, ultimately to connect it with the oil spot that is being developed around Kandahar city. Okay, this was General Petraeus when he was explaining the U.S.-Afghan strategy, NATO-Afghan strategy in the year of 2010. And it's interesting because as I read this quote, when I read it the first time, I thought that I was very taken by this notion of this oil spot. There's a visual analogy within this text that made me feel like I actually understand this pretty well. So for me on the spectrum, I understand the idea that's being delivered pretty well. Of course, all of you may have a different take, may disagree, but that's the way I took it. And here's the last quote. This is the captain. Brace for impact. Obviously, these were the comments of Captain Sullenberger to the passengers on board his plane. These are the only 7 words that he had time to say as he was about to land in the river. I think that, if I'd been on that plane, I would have said, I fully understand this. Now, here's why I've taken you through this, because let's face it, 99% of the time that we are expected to deliver or listen to a message, it is delivered in the way that we just read. Our messages, our thoughts, when it comes to business, when it comes to education, when it comes to finance, when it comes to politics, when it comes to the law, are delivered through words like we just saw. Now, all of those messages clearly were not the same in terms of our ability to comprehend them. All of us, again, are going to have individual responses. Some of us are going to say, I understood some of those messages perfectly. Some of us are going to say, I didn't understand that message at all. And some of us are going to say, well, in some cases, I sort of understood it, but I'm not sure. So the point I have for me is that predominantly, I did not understand the essence of most of those messages that we just read. So the question I have, does that make me stupid? Is the fact that I didn't understand what Madoff was talking about or what Obama was talking about. I barely understood what Coca-Cola was talking about. I only understood, kind of these simple messages. Does that mean that I'm stupid? Well, I don't think so. Back as a student, I did pretty well in school. And so maybe if I'm not stupid, is the question then, are these people stupid? If their messages are so difficult to understand, are they stupid? Well, no, they're absolutely not. These are incredibly smart, well-educated, and people who are capable of being completely articulate when they mean to. So what went wrong? And that's where the Blah-blahmeter comes in. So here's what I'd like you to do. If you have your printout of the Blah-blahmeter, I'd like you to follow along. If you don't, or if you're willing to try this with me, what I'd like you to do is take a blank sheet of paper and draw the Blah-blahmeter with me. Here's why. As I started to work on this book, Blah, 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 I recognized that not all messages that I didn't understand were the same. There's a difference in the level of clarity, there's a difference in the way they're delivered, and I think that there's almost a difference in their intent. I'd like you to take and let's draw a box on our piece of paper. We're going to draw the framework of the Blah-blahmeter, which for those of you who have paid attention to our cadet lessons, you're going to recognize is really a map. It's a map that shows where do different types of messages line up. And then I'd like you to go ahead and take that box and add in some lines to break it up into 3 small sections at the bottom, 1 big section at the top, and 4 sections up and down. So we end up with a kind of a grid that looks like this. We're going to label this the Blah-blahmeter. This is going to be our tool. And what we're going to do now is we're going to label our coordinates. We all remember that when we make a map, we have to label our coordinates. So the first one is the coordinate around message clarity. The message is ... The next is the idea itself. The idea is ... The next one is the intent of this idea, and this message is something. And then the last one will be vivid thinking will help in what way. So this is kind of our vertical axis. It's about the nature of the message, the idea, the intent. And our horizontal axis then is going to be the level of clarity that we have. So first point will be no blah. The message will be very clear. The second one will be 1 layer of blah. Next will be double layers of blah, becoming increasingly difficult to understand. And then of course the third one is where things are truly blah, blah, blah. Now this is going to be our measuring device to determine what is the nature of the message, what is the idea, and how clear is it. So for example, if a message has no blah, we, as the listener, are very happy because the message was clear. And if the message was clear, usually that indicates that the idea behind it was pretty simple, or at least simply stated. That means typically when a simple idea is clearly delivered, the intent of the person delivering it is to go ahead and clarify. That person is very interested in us understanding a simple view of their idea delivered clearly. So if we want to apply vivid thinking, we don't have to do a whole lot. The message is already clear, it's already expressed in a simple way, and it's intended to clarify. So if we wanted to, though, if we wanted to apply the rules of vivid thinking, what we could do with such a message is we could make it become absolutely crystalline, just brilliant and easy to understand and so attractive that we just want to touch it. So that is the first level of the Blah-blahmeter, a message that has no blah behind it. An example of that would be what Captain Sullenberger said. This is the captain, brace for impact. If we were to map that out in the Blah-blahmeter, we would say that message is clear. It is a simple message. We understand it. So that took us through a message that really needs very little help. So let's move on now to what is a message that has 1 layer of blah. Now this is a message that I think is the kind that just kind of puts us to sleep. Really what it is it's a message that's boring. And really the reason why a message tends to be boring is because the idea itself has not been effectively simplified. The idea itself is one that remains overly complex, overly complicated. So the idea is probably very complicated. And let's face it, we know that everything in life is complex, but that doesn't mean everything has to be complicated. There is a way to find a simple explanation of even the most complex of things, which is our job as people that are trying to become more vivid in our thinking. But let's ask, so if the message is boring but it's complicated, what is the intent? Well, we've got to believe that the intent was to illuminate. It was to make it clear, but it failed. So what can Vivid do in this case? Well, what Vivid can help us do is find a way to unclutter that message so that we can then sharpen it and come up with a mechanism of describing it that's not boring. So let me give you an example of this one, of what we read. I think that in a way this is a little bit where the message from General Petraeus falls in. It's probably overly verbose, even though the essential idea is pretty clear. And in particular, we can even look at what he had to say, and if we superimpose it on a map, I think what he's talking about becomes clear. So he talks about these oil spots in the Helmand Valley, and of course it's metaphorical. What he's doing is saying, we've got these spots that are peaceful here, and our goal is to continue to increase the size of those peaceful spots, just in the way that oil would spread on a piece of fabric, to increase the size of those peaceful spots so that over time we have a larger area which is peaceful. Now, I think it's a model that it's a message that's delivered well. Whether it works or not, I have no idea, but it's at least the message is one that's possible to understand. Then I think the real example of this level of blah is one that comes when we look at what President Obama had to say about healthcare. This is just an unreadable quotation. And I know from having done work with people involved in healthcare that there is tremendous amount of intelligent message behind it, but it's just impossible to go ahead and make sense of it. So what we could do there is unclutter that message in order to illuminate. Which brings us now to the third level of our Blah-blahmeter, where things are becoming very foggy. The message is becoming very foggy, so that when we hear it, it's not that we fall asleep. We know that a message is coming in. We're simply saying, huh? I don't get it. What was that about? And I think the reason that often that happens in a message is because the central idea, it's not that it's simple, it's not that it's complicated, it's that the central idea is actually missing. There isn't really anything there. And so the intent often for the person who's delivering this sort of the blah blah message is actually to obfuscate. The intent is to say, I don't have a message, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dance around and be kind of fancy with my words over here in order to distract you from the fact that I really don't have much to say. And so what Vivid can help us do is focus in on that idea and discover what the real essence of that idea is about, and then develop that essence so we don't end up with a message which is completely foggy. And the example here, I think, is the one that comes from vitamin water, where if you read this, it says, this is specially formulated, blah, 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 blah. It's clear that what's happening is this is really just sort of marketing talk about the fact that here you've got a sugar water product and we're just trying to sell it. There's really very little in this product that's of much value, so let's go ahead and puff up the language around it to try to make it more interesting. I think that this is something that we find all of the time in business speak in particular, and I think my favorite example of this is the one where we hear people say, my favorite quote ever is, let's go ahead and leverage synergies to maximize shareholder value. And I hear something like that, and again, as we've seen so many times, I'm just, what? Are you crazy? What kind of thing does that mean? Leverage synergies to maximize shareholder value. The point is there's actually a very simple idea under that, isn't there? The simple idea is what we'd like to do is look for areas of overlap between two companies that can generate a lot of money. I mean, wouldn't it be better off if we just said something like that? So that takes us through level 2 of the Blah-blahmeter, which brings us to the last level, blah, blah, blah. And this is where things get really bad, where our words actually become almost like weapons of mass destruction. The idea here is because it's not that our message is foggy, our message is actually misleading. And what I mean by that is we want to talk about something over here, but we know that it is so repellent that in a way we distract our audience to maybe make them look in the wrong direction so that they don't even pay attention to what we're talking about, to realize that our underlying idea is actually something which is pretty rotten. And I'm going to draw something really unpleasant here, kind of a steamy pile of yuckiness. The idea is actually rotten, and our intent in this particular case is actually to divert people from what we're really talking about to get them to look at something else. Now, when we come across a message like that, the purpose of Vivid is going to be to just blow up that message, what is essentially that big lie, in order to debunk the lie that's there, dispel the rumors, and figure out what actually is the truth of the message. And the example here, of course, is our last one, going back to Madoff Securities. And if you were to read the way it had been described, it's not surprising that this message is actually very difficult to get to the essence of, even though it looks intelligent, because this is a perfect example of obfuscation and misleading to make us think that there's something there. If you were to go and look, what Madoff Securities was actually doing was complete fraud. And the way that it was described, how the money was invested, was a lie, because what it really was a large pyramid scheme. So the idea that many people are investing, and what's happening is the people at the top are getting their money back by just borrowing it from the people below. And that's a system that can continue to work as long as the pyramid grows, but the moment someone says, hey, this isn't real, the pyramid stops, the entire system collapses. And that's exactly what happened. And Bernie Madoff probably knew that that's exactly what he was doing, but knew that he'd never get people to invest if they knew what it really was. So instead, he was able to come up with this language that describes in very interesting terms a model which is for the most part a total lie. So that is what the Blah-blahmeter is all about. When we hear a message, we're sitting here and there's someone talking to us. I want us to be very, very clear in what it is that we're hearing. Is the message clear? Has it been addressed in a simple way with the intent to clarify? If so, good. But what if, on the other hand, there's a message and we're very confused because we're really not understanding it very well, but someone is telling us more and more about it? We have to be aware of the fact perhaps the reason it's so confusing is because it's actually intended to mislead us, to distract us from what the idea is really about, to divert us. And if that's the case, it's our job now to go in there and use our vivid tools to find out what really is that message all about. Now, of course, the interesting thing about the Blah-blahmeter is we don't just want to apply it to someone else. This is also a tool that I want us to apply to ourselves. And what I mean by that is, let's say that we're the one doing the talking and our audience is over here. We want them to pay attention. Are we delivering a message which sits in this category? Or are we sometimes trying to deliver a message which is in this category? So I want us to use the Blah-blahmeter as a way, as a tool to filter the incoming messages to try to determine whether they're clear or not. If they're not, why is that? And what might we do to begin to clarify them? Which brings us to the tools that we're going to use. After we've used the Blah-blahmeter, tool number 1, we use it as a kind of a filter to get the message to come in so we know, is it clear or not? If it's clear, great. If it's not, we're going to learn to use the vivid thinking tools of vivid grammar to force that idea to become vivid and visual. And then, of course, after that, we're going to take our messages and apply again the forest, form, only essentials, recognizable, evolving, spans differences, and targeted to make sure that our ideas become diamond-like, crystalline clear in how we deliver them. So that's the introduction to the Blah-blahmeter. There is a little bit of homework that I'd like you to do just to practice with this tool. So what I'd like you to do is go out and find 2 or 3 prominent quotations. They could be from anywhere. They could be from business, they could be from politics, they could be from education, from science, from the law, from your favorite television show, from an advertisement that you see. And then I'd like you to use the Blah-blahmeter to place them, to say, do you like this message because it fits in this category, or do you dislike this message because it fits in that category? And then after you've located the quotes within the Blah-blahmeter, see if you can deduce what you think the intent of the message might really have been. So that's what the Blah-blahmeter is all about. It's kind of a fun tool. It was fun to create, and it's something that I use all the time. In the meantime, I want to finish out this session with a quick review of the assignment from last week. The first one comes from John, just not too far away from me down in Sunnyvale. The assignment again was to just go ahead and take some words and figure out a way to represent them. So John had picked the word of time. Nice drawing of how to draw time. Nice drawing of comedy. Very nice drawing of dance. Musical comedies, we start to get into adjectives now. Wonderful. Tragicomedy, where I can tell that this is clearly Prince of Denmark there. I knew him well. Romantic comedy, look at that one. Excellent. And then we've got some verbs. So we can charge. I love this one. Look, how we can sing, and a very nice visualization of a sentence, crying over spilled milk. Lovely picture. Also, Shivanand from India had sent in his response. So some words that he'd picked, of course, beautiful drawing of an umbrella. And in the terms of applying adjectives, I like the way he did this. You know, it's a very white, fluffy cloud. Nice, very beautiful drawing of a tree. Someone playing with their ball. Someone reading. Someone fishing by the river. And the sentence from Shivanand, Ramu is playing cricket. I can draw the whole thing out here. Thanks very much.
Hey, thank you all for another great lesson. This is Dan signing off from the Napkin Academy, but don't go away. Now on our new platform, you can still submit your homework. Debbie, our community manager, is going to join you right now to show you exactly how to do that, and I really encourage you, do your homework. Okay, take it away, Debbie. See you soon.
We hope you enjoyed this Napkin Academy classic video. We've made it easier than ever to share your homework. After you've completed your homework and have a JPEG or PNG file saved on your computer, come back to this course. Once you're back here, scroll to the bottom of the screen, and in the comments box, you can add a comment. I'm just going to call this one My Homework. You can also add images by clicking on the Insert Edit Image button here. In the source box, click on the file. In the Images window, click on Upload, and then click on Add Files. This is going to take you to your computer where you can search for your images. I'm just going to search for mine in Pictures, and I'm going to choose this image here. You can also add multiple images here. Click Upload. After the upload is complete, click Close. Then scroll down, and you'll see that the last image is here, and it's checked. This is the one we just uploaded. Click Insert. I suggest in the Dimensions box you change the maximum to 1200 pixels and leave the Constrained Proportions box checked. You can also add an image description here if you'd like. Click OK. You'll see that your image has been added to your comment. And now the last step, the most important one, make sure that you click the green comment button here to upload your homework to the Napkin Academy. We hope to see your homework soon.